but I missed that.
Great.
On the way out.
Hello. You guys all ready? Ready? Cool. All right. Hey, Melissa and Chris, can you guys hear us?
Slumped down.
Oh, Melissa, you're muted.
I sure can.
Great.
Switch chairs here. That was too.
Melissa, you are still muted.
Hi, I'm here.
Okay, there we go. Great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Before we start, Jesse will not be at this meeting. So Melissa, our vice chair, will be running it if everyone is okay with her running it via Zoom. Is that cool with everyone? Great.
Fritz Klinke was hoping to join, but I'm not sure who's assisting him in getting online. So if he can't, I have a letter that.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Keep an eye on it.
Hey Shane, is Lauren gonna be here tonight?
Lauren's in Japan.
And where?
In Japan with his family.
Oh my God.
Good for him.
Yeah,
Good for him. Good for him, that's right.
but I was really hoping Fritz would be able to participate. But if he can't, I have a letter that has a lot of information from both of them.
Great.
Great. Awesome. Cool. Well, Melissa, I will hand it over to you to start the meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. It is now 5 p.m. and I call to order this June 11th, 2024 public meeting of the Town of Silverton Historic Review Committee. Can we please have a roll call?
Mike Garriott,
You.
Maria Samora.
Here.
Carl Schnickner,
Here.
Melissa Childs,
Here.
and Chairperson Rowe.
Not here.
Okay, thank you. So next is any revisions to the agenda. So all members should have this evening's agenda before them. Do we have any requested amendments to the agenda or the order of its items?
Yes, I have two requests to amend the agenda. The first is that there was just a typo for the approval of the minutes. That should be the May 14th minutes, which are included in your packet. And then I would like to add a brief discussion item under 2 committee business to discuss the committee vacancy, if that's okay with everyone.
That sounds fine. Do we have to have a motion to do that?
No.
Okay, great.
May I remind everybody that the acoustics in this room is not great. It's a beautiful room. The acoustics suck. So we want to hear from you in a very vocal way or something. You know, keep your voice. For me too, I'm old. You got to keep your voices up a little bit and understandable. Beautiful room, bad acoustics.
Okay. So I think we can now move on to item 1A, which is a public hearing. This hearing was notified to the public on May 30th, 2024 via the Silverton Standard. And this is a public hearing regarding 24-15 OVR, a request for exterior building alterations on an existing commercial structure within the Architectural Review Overlay District, AROD, and Historic Overlay District, located at 1337 Green Street. The public hearing is now open and will take the form of a staff presentation and an applicant presentation, followed by opportunity for public comment. The committee, hang on. The committee will then proceed with discussion and a decision for the applicant. The applicant may be asked questions by the committee and will have a chance for final rebuttal prior to any decision. Committee members may also ask questions of staff during deliberation. For committee members, if there is a conflict or perceived conflict, this is the time to leave the room. Do we have any conflicts for the property at 1337 Green Street?
No.
Having none, proceed with the staff presentation, please?
All right, can everyone see my screen? Okay, perfect. The application before you all tonight is for exterior building alterations on an existing structure located at 1337 Green Street. The site is generally located north of 13th Street between Green Street and Reese Street. The applicants are Shane Furman and Lauren Liu. It is within the BP zoning district and the architectural review overlay district and the historic overlay district. All required documents and fees have been paid and it was properly noticed. No public comments have been received to date. The proposal includes exterior alterations on an existing historic structure. The subject site is 2,500 square feet, and there is an existing single-story structure which fills the entire lot. The second-story addition will be set back 10 feet to preserve the historical front facade and header. The 10-foot setback will also be utilized as a second-story deck. The proposal also includes a new first-floor entrance on the north elevation to provide direct access to the hotel guests to the adjacent courtyard. And the building materials include brick facade and vertically oriented windows, which match the existing structure. This application is before you all tonight because any facade or exterior building alterations on existing structures viewable to the public require HRC review and approval. Additionally, the committee may add site-specific conditions of approval with the intent of retaining the town's historic landmark designation. Staff reviewed the application against the site-specific conditions and found that the proposed architectural, structural, mass, and scale are compatible with the surrounding structures. The application does include windowless walls. However, on the south elevation, however, the adjacent structure is located on the property line, and adding windows could impact the future development of that second story. The addition is also set back 10 feet from the front facade, which would help reduce the visibility of the windowless walls to the public. Finally, the proposal includes a deck along the 10-foot second-story setback, which is unique to this structure. However, there are several other rooftop decks or second-story decks along Green Street. Therefore, staff does not have any site-specific recommendations for this application. Therefore, staff finds the applicant has submitted all required materials. And those materials comply with the conditions of section 1645 and 1646 of the Silverton Municipal Code. Staff therefore recommends approval of the AROD and Historic Overlay District application for exterior building alterations on an existing structure located at 1337 Green Street as presented. However, this decision is up to the Historic Review Committee, and they may choose to recommend approval of condition, continue, or deny the application based upon the testimony and evidence it hears. This slide includes sample motions regarding the application, and these motions are also included in tonight's meeting packet. That is the end of my presentation. I'll turn it back over to you, Melissa, and allow the applicant to address the committee.
Thank you, Chris, for the staff presentation. Applicant, please state your name and make your presentation.
Hello, I'm Shane Furman. It's nice to see everybody. It doesn't look like anyone else was able to join us on behalf of Lauren or Fritz, so I'll present on behalf of everybody. And I just want to start out by saying thank you, and that the process was actually pretty straightforward. There was overlap with multiple checklists since we're in all of the districts. But it was pretty easy to fill it out, and working with Lucy and CPS was also really straightforward and easy. I found it to be a nice, smooth process, so thank you. Okay, so this is a letter that was written by Lauren, Lou, and Fritz Klinke. As restoration contractors in Silverton and surrounding areas for over 50 years, we appreciate your consideration of this letter regarding the development of the property known as the 8 Ball and the related areas. It has been our goal to save, recover, rediscover, and encourage new building and renovations in the business district, as well as the residential areas of Silverton where possible. We have worked with the San Juan County Historical Society in providing recommendations and advice in historical structures, as well as the state, both in consultation and also in state-funded projects. We've been directly involved with 8 storefront restorations on Green Street and 1 new building, which are mostly directly related to this application. We restored the handlebars, Adelaides, 8-ball storefronts, and facades to the original architecture after fires did extensive damage to all 3 buildings. The Exchange livery, known as the Great Divide, the French Bakery, known as the Teller House, the Pickle Barrel, the Silverton Standard, and the Minor, the 8-ball, and the Lemon Tree Building storefronts were also restorations to varying degrees and reestablishments of the storefronts from photographic and forensic evidence. The Smedley's Ice Cream Parlor building is a newer period structure of the 70s, which we designed in sympathy with the period Victorian architecture of the 1880s to the 1920s. For the 8-ball building, the storefront was rebuilt after 2 events destroyed the building, leaving only the 2 side-bearing walls, the steel framework, and some upper masonry on the street storefront, and nothing on the back alley wall. The first event was a collapse of the roof and some floor damage due to snow overload on the roof. The accumulation of snow and water from thawing damaged the bowling alley lanes, and the bowling alley was dismantled. The second event was a fire some years later that consumed the new cover roof, all the rafters, a large percentage of the first floor, and some basement timber damage. This was the condition of the building when we, and I'm speaking as Lauren and Fritz, acquired it. To date, the 8-ball has been engineered to stabilize the 2 side masonry brick walls with double micro lambs on either side, anchor stitch bolted to the brick along the 100-foot length, and open wood truss floor joists installed perpendicular to the micro lamb bond beams. The framework is designed for 150-pound per square foot load in anticipation of a second story and roof support. There is a temporary roof currently on this framework that is easily removed to expose the open wood truss floor below it. Storefront windows are reproductions, but reductions from photographic evidence. The depth of the open wood trusses required a reduction of the original height of the windows by 6 inches. Photos from the 1970s show a coursing of square glass block windows at the bottom of the storefront panels. They were not original as they were installed to allow light into the bowling alley basement. The basement was also not original to the building as it was excavated down and the ground floor raised in the 70s. Approximately 60% of the front facade brick has been rebricked or refurbished to the original configuration and coursing. The brick parapet cap is split-faced colored concrete. The storefront facade and architecture has been maintained, although more durable materials have been selectively utilized for safety and weather-resistant purposes. We have emphasized the preservation of the frontage and street facades as the most critical and highest priority for street aesthetic and historic architectural conformity, and so it is the intent to carry the new upper story architecture with the same historic emphasis. The setback of the new second story for the 8-ball building is the main concern at present. A setback larger than proposed would result in a loss of real estate so significant that it would negatively encourage raising the original facade height with artificial fencing or barrier walls similar to handrail and guardrail modifications or extensions that have been installed to come into compliance with current standards for older buildings. Does that make sense to everybody? So the idea is to limit the visibility of the addition, but what would be permitted and less historically accurate would be putting a taller front facade on the building so that you couldn't see anything. Otherwise, what's proposed is the balance that we thought was best for historic integrity and utilization. Even more concerning would be a redesign of the storefront facade in its entirety and removal of all historic elements of the original. There are a number of examples in Silverton and other towns of well done and not so well done renovations of commercial storefronts like that. The historic look and as much of the actual original historic fabric as can be preserved is the goal for the 8-ball facade. The second story would be complementary but not invisible to cross-street observation. The hope for the rewrite of the Silverton Town Code is to establish a standard buffer setback for 1-story buildings and another standard for 2-story buildings, with the emphasis placed on suitable and agreeable architecture to the original design. Casual observation from the street by pedestrian or vehicle viewing suggested to us that a 10-foot setback would delineate a new structure adequately from the original or restored storefront. This setback would also provide an adequate buffer space for second-floor occupants to be hidden from street viewing. The preservation of historic buildings and the architectural designs dating up to the 1920s has been our highest priority and encouragement. We realize that preservation of the buildings will entail the ability to be viable and successful for the occupants of the buildings as well. Finding that common ground is what we hope to develop and be able to apply for future projects. Respectfully, Lauren Liu and Fritz Klinke. I had two other quick notes relating to the staff comments, and one is that the windowless wall on the south side is a party wall, and I believe that we're not allowed to put windows on that wall. In addition, we would forever limit the ability of our southern neighbors to build a second story. And so that's why that is a windowless wall. And that's my only comment. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shane. It is now time for public comment. So if anyone from the public wishes to make comment regarding the application we have just heard, now is the time to do so. Please state your name prior to your comment, and you will have up to 3 minutes to speak. We will start with any in-person comments and then move to comments on Zoom. Please note that the YouTube version of the meeting does not support interaction and commentary. If you are online wishing to comment, please join the Zoom link and raise your hand.
We have no in-person comment. And it appears that we do not have anyone online either.
Thank you. So we will now close the public comment portion of this hearing and allow the committee to discuss the application in question. Committee members may also ask questions directly of the applicant or directly of the staff.
Oh, we allowed
Anybody,
to,
any comments?
we allowed to,
Yep.
okay. Oh, Shane, thanks. Are you going to do your best to hire local people, any jobs, construction, whatever it takes? Are you going to make it really allowable to use as many local people in whatever form, in whatever job that there is? Are you going to make an effort to use local contractors, entertainers, whatever it takes? I want to know that you are committed to try your best to use local people. And I know it's not always possible, but I want sort of a commitment from you that you, Lauren, Chris, whatever, will try to hire local people whenever possible first. And I also have a little addendum to that. If you can hire a veteran or two, that would even be better. What do you think about that idea?
I would start with an asterisk that I think that's outside the scope of this committee's purview, but I'm also happy to respond, which is that we always have done that. And I will continue to do that. And Lauren Liu is our general contractor on this entire project. So he always hires everyone locally, and to the extent possible, we also buy from the local hardware store, even if the prices are higher than.
I have one other question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Is the interior of the new addition, is that already designed and written in stone, so to speak?
We're still developing that because it's subject to the decisions made today.
Okay. Is there a possibility sometime in the future we'll get to see some of those plans, or?
That typically wouldn't come to the historic review committee.
Well, I was actually asking as a private citizen.
I'd be happy to show them to you and for you to come by and take tours whenever you'd like.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a comment, and I like your proposal. I think it's going to be beautiful. I only have one concern, and it may not be in our purview, but it's something that the whole town needs to be aware of, and we need to start a conversation about it, and that is parking. So there's going to be 3 hotels in a row right there, and then the Grand Imperial, and then the new hotel across the street from the Legion, and no one has mentioned the word parking. So I'm wondering how our town is going to deal with that.
That's a concern that I share as well as a business owner. And I hope that we work together to come up with something good. And I do think maybe diagonal parking at some point in the future, or other meters or other things like that restrict overnight parking to some extent on Green Street will help with some of our congestion. But I agree that that's potentially an issue that we're going to face.
I know Durango's facing it, Uray's facing it. And I've been talking to some business people in Uray, and they tell me that people drive right through Uray because they can't find a place to park. So, you know, I mean, it's just reality.
Yeah, good question.
But the building, all that is great, in my view.
I like it too.
Just a clarifying question for you, that the second story deck would be enclosed by the top of the facade. There's not going to be like a railing that extends above.
We don't have plans to put a railing there, but if Bevan requires one. But I don't think there would be on the front. That front facade comes up pretty high, but we may need them on the sides, or we'd have to bring the brick on the sides up a little higher. But right now, I think that the designs that are in there show, I think, a 5-foot brick height relative to the floor height. So I don't think additional railing would need to be there. That would be a good question for Lauren, though.
And I have a question, just, second story decks on Green Street. I can think maybe the grocery store and that, new white duplex that is in the, maybe the 800 block, 700 block, not sure, behind the Avon Hotel there. Those are the two that I can think of. Can anybody else give me an example of a second story deck on Green Street?
Doesn't the Coffee Bear have one?
Yeah, they have them.
That's a rooftop.
Third
That's a
story.
rooftop.
There's a little observation deck on top of the building next to the 8-ball. But it's set back very far.
Oh, it's on the rear of the building that looks out west, right?
It's in the middle, yeah. But I wouldn't, it's still a rooftop, and it's technically a second story deck,
rooftop.
but yeah, it's
Yeah.
further back.
That's the rooftop. Okay, those were the only two, and those are obvious, recent builds. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, the last 10 years anyway. So,
Melissa, if I may interrupt real quick, another option or another 2 second story decks are 1145 Green Street, which is directly south of the Avalanche Brewing Company. It's a 3-story structure, but there are 2 decks along the second story.
Is that the Harley building?
the Harley building. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. And those look, I mean, they seem to mesh and look maybe old. I know they're not, but yeah, they seem to work visually. Thanks, Chris. I didn't think of those.
And then one more is the 1045 Green Street, which is the new residential structure on the east side of Green Street.
Maybe that's that duplex, that white duplex.
It is, yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Any other comment from the committee? Okay, hearing none. Is there a motion?
I motion that we accept and pass what we have in front of us. I don't have the numbers in front of me that,
Yeah,
sorry.
it's all right. Lucy can
I
write.
can read the sample.
Yeah, if you want to read it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I move to recommend approval of case 24-15, a historic overlay and A-Rod application for exterior building alterations on an existing commercial structure within the Architectural Review Overlay District and Historic Overlay District located at 1337 Green Street as presented. Finding the historic overlay and A-Rod application is in conformance with sections 16-4-5 and 16-4-6 of the Silverton Municipal Code.
Yep, there's the whole thing. Is that the first motion? Do you need?
Yep, we'll
Need
need
a second? Because I'm ready to second that.
Great. Second, roll call, please. Mike Dariak. Mike Dariak,
Yes.
Maria Samora,
Yes.
Carl Schlichter,
Yes,
Childs,
Yes.
Great, motion approved unanimously.
Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, and so now we move on to our next agenda item, which is
Be again.
committee business. Review of the Architectural Review Overlay District, Historic Overlay District, and Builder's Handbook Application Checklists to compile feedback for the Land Use Code update. So I imagine we have some sort of staff report for this. Gabby?
Yes, yeah, we will have Gabby from Clarion lead this conversation, so
Okay,
hand it over
thanks,
to you.
Gabby.
There we go. Couldn't find the unmute button. Okay, so, do you all remember when we were out there at in May? We thought it would be helpful to go through the checklists for the Historic Overlay District and the Builder's Handbook, as well as AROD if we have time. Just line by line, to see which of those standards you think are functioning well, that you think we can delete, or that you think need some form of modification, whether that's clarification or some additional detail, so on and so forth. So my plan was to just pull up and my video has been on the fritz lately, so sorry. Pull up the checklist and just walk through it with you all and see what sort of comments you have about these things. So make this bigger. All right. So the first checklist we have is just the standards for the Historic Overlay District. So these are actually within the code. They are not in the handbook. And so I just planned on letting you all kind of walk through this, and then I can mark, keep, delete, or write how we need it to be modified. That way we can, get these more on the right track for our next iteration of the land use code. So the first regulations are related to setbacks. Any thoughts here?
I'm good with building shall abut the front property line. I don't see any issues with anything here in this first section. Anybody else?
Nope.
Okay, those is keep. Does that include this exception for structures existing for 2008? Cannot increase setbacks?
I say keep it.
I
Agreed.
don't have a problem with that.
Okay. Right. So now we have that. So this is the requirement that commercial uses be in 1 to 3 story mixed use structures. And we've already gotten the comment from staff about needing to allow for some flexibility with residential being allowed in the rear as well as above. And so actually in the latest draft of the land use code, we had a requirement that it's the first 20 feet of the ground level cannot be, a residential use.
I agree with that. I mean, it's very classical to have the store in the front and the apartment in the back, and there's lots of examples of this already in historic buildings. So I would say lose that.
Okay. Okay, but generally speaking, we do want to keep the, what is right up against Green Street. We want that to be non-residential in the historic overlay district.
Correct.
Okay,
Agreed.
okay. All right. This is kind of a broad item here of vary in terms of footprint and architectural elevations, as well as compatible with adjacent buildings.
I personally, I don't really understand the one about vary in terms of footprint. I don't really understand what that means. Such buildings shall, what, from their neighbors? Vary in terms of footprint and architectural elevations. But building scale shall be compatible with adjacent buildings. I say lose that because there's some small little structures on Green Street, which is our only, well, there's a section of Blair that's BP, but the primary BP zone is Green Street. And where else are we going to put our larger commercial buildings than on Green Street? And so if you have, for example, and I know of some, you have like a 700-800 square foot home on Green Street, and now you have somebody that wants to build this like amazing mixed use building that is adjacent, but now they're limited to doing so because of this rule. I just think we need to utilize our BP zone to its best and highest, and it's the only place for some of these larger mixed use buildings. And so I just don't think the scale shall be compatible with adjacent buildings. I'd like to lose that.
I disagree.
I disagree.
I wonder what compatible means. I don't think it necessarily means that they're the same scale, just that it fits within the streetscape. Is that what y'all are thinking?
Say that again.
So like this, this line says buildings scale shall be compatible. And I think Melissa raises a really important point, which is that if that restricts somebody from a structure that's maybe bigger than its neighbor, that's perhaps overly restrictive, but I don't think that's what compatible means in my reading.
It's all relative anyway.
Right.
What somebody feels is too big or too small or whatever.
Right.
Compatibility is kind of almost like a general terminology. And I could see how that can confuse some people. But I like the charm of Silverton the way it is. I'm not saying that it must stay exactly that way, but I think we've got to be really careful about allowing things that basically look out of place. There is buildings that would be proposed that I know we need the space sometimes, for businesses and so forth, but I really don't want to see anything look totally out of place.
Well, and also
Whatever that means.
don't we have the ability to build a 5,000 square foot building on Green Street? And so if you build a 5,000 square foot building next to a 700 square foot building, it's going to overshadow it, make it disappear, and it does lose the charm of our little town. And I don't think the scope or the goal of our town is just because it's to make the biggest buildings you can make. You can do a lot of things in a small building. And I don't think we should lose that. I don't think in my personal opinion, we should not remove that.
Can we take public comment or do we have to wait for the end of the meeting?
I don't know.
This is under committee business, so it's a committee discussion, but, if you all wanted to agree to take public comment, that's something you could do.
I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that.
I think we've got one from Shane.
Thank you. I wouldn't be offended if you said no. Ben actually raised a good point that adjacent, I think, might mean up to 300 feet. So clarifying whether or not adjacent means immediately adjacent or what the rest of the streetscape looks like could be really helpful. Because if there is one little building, but then two big ones, I think you end up with kind of a reasonable result. And then the other concern that I had about this is the mixed use requirement. So for example, if you wanted to build a building that's just a hotel that doesn't have a coffee shop or a bar or something else, that would not be permitted. And so I think, and there's other examples where, or like a restaurant, a single story doesn't need to be mixed use, but if you had like a 2-story coffee shop, like the Coffee Bear wouldn't be allowed as it currently is. And so I think there's a decent number of examples where mixed use could be a problem.
That's a good point, Shane. Commercial uses shall be contained in 1 to 3-story mixed use structures. So thanks for pointing that out, because that reads that like the Coffee Bear, well, that Coffee Bear does have residential in the back. But you're saying this reads that you could not have a just a retail store, for example, if you wanted to do that, or just a hotel without a coffee shop. So I hear you and agree with you on that one, that you're mandating mixed use, which I question if that should be there.
Yeah, because I think there's a difference between saying you can't do a fully residential building, but you need to have like an active ground floor space. And you could do that with a hotel, right? Like the lobby of a hotel is like an active pedestrian space. So it doesn't mean that you couldn't still keep the, pedestrian oriented feel of Green Street if you allowed, I don't know though, would you want a completely office building? As long as I guess the offices kind of had like a front space that was active, or do we need to sort of reserve that for more retail restaurant uses?
May I bring up what I'd call the cookie cutter effect, which is boring. And that means we're being so restrictive about certain sizes and so forth. I don't want to see a skyscraper on any street in town, no matter where it is. But I'm also against having this effect where you see all these cute little things with the correct gingerbread and so forth, and they're all looking alike, one after another. Boring and not very historic. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to remind people that when Silverton first started, there were all kinds of structures in town. I'm not saying that they would be allowed today, because people lived in lean-tos, shacks, sheds, tents, and everything else. Again, probably won't be allowed because of all kinds of rules and sanitation, everything else. However, I did like that diversity, size and shape and so forth like that. That was Silverton. Silverton was never and is not a classic Victorian town, built in the Victorian era, and it had certain, and still has certain, houses and homes which have the gingerbread effect, the Victorian effect, but it was never meant to be that. It was a mining town. In a mining town, you had all kinds of structures. Just want you to keep that in mind for when you think of the history of the town, and when you start getting too restrictive and too cookie cutter in our look of the town. The town was never really a cookie cutter type thing. I'd like to keep it that way. I'd like the diversity. And I understand about the small building and then the big building, but the fact is that's the way it was. And that it's historically valuable just to keep that in mind. Thank you.
And I guess I'll just get some clarification about this mixed use requirement in a commercial use. A commercial use must have a mixed use structure. So if, say, for example, somebody wanted to build this fabulous art gallery, it could not solely be an art gallery. Is that correct? There would have to be some kind of residential use to qualify for this mixed use requirement. Is that correct?
That, or as written, it could also be offices like related to the art gallery. That's how it reads with how it is currently written. Yeah.
Okay, but it would not be a residential requirement necessarily, is what I hear you say. Thank you. Shall we move on down the list?
Well, I'm wondering, do you want to remove the mixed use piece of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question. It's a good question. And it seems somewhat flexible as written. If I'm hearing that, it doesn't have to have commercial and retail. It just has to be more than one use, and that could be commercial and office. So I think that sounds flexible enough for me, and I definitely agree with allow residential in the rear of the building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think though, as it's written though, it wouldn't allow that hotel, like just a hotel. Like that would still be an issue.
And I don't think that should be an issue.
Okay.
So yeah, so maybe you can just, I don't know, strike a word or two in there, but yeah, maybe that needs some revision.
Okay.
You have a comment?
I think we have a comment.
Oh, no, I'm okay.
No?
Melissa got that. What I was gonna say.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion because as written, it probably does do what we want it to do, it sounds like, but the fact that it's taking this conversation to recognize that means that maybe there can be some more clarity added.
I guess I do. I think the main intent was to not allow just residential as opposed to limiting a single use of commercial. And so
That's already captured in the BP requirements, I believe. Is that correct?
What, sorry.
For the business pedestrian district, I know they're separate things, but.
Yeah, sorry, but what's captured within that?
Like not a purely residential use.
Oh, currently you can have a purely residential use in
But
BP.
you can't.
Yes.
That's my mistake.
I agree with Carl that we could use some more clarity on that statement.
Yeah.
And they would just take away all these issues. Get rid of them.
Okay. So what I'm kind of wondering is for these two, the vary in terms of footprint and architectural elevations and building scale compatible. So if you remember, we're in the sort of standards that are codified in the actual land use code. And what I'm wondering is, are these things that are more so addressed via the guidelines in the like the builder's handbook? Do we need to state this in these standards like this, or do they need to be fleshed out a bit more? I mean, the question of what is compatible is, that is a hard question to answer and is, usually requires some additional regulations, but as we move down, you can see that you're starting to get at building scale via your height limitation and this maximum footprint. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that. If we removed those, would you be comfortable knowing that those issues are addressed in the handbook? Would you rather them stay here in the standards?
And Gabby, can you quickly just give a really brief overview of the difference between standards and guidelines?
Yes. So your standards are, the absolute, the shalls, versus guidelines are guidance. And so you don't necessarily have to follow them. I mean, you all as the HRC have the ability to use those guidelines to make your decisions and make suggestions and conditions and things. But fundamentally, these standards are these set rules. And so oftentimes, especially when it comes to historic design, standards are more so kind of the cut and dry dimensions or building form, the things about mixed use, height, footprints, those would be standards versus the guidelines would give you some options on, how to make it compatible based on historic conditions. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Good question. Are there any standards or guidelines that go towards becoming a Main Street community / preserving our historic designation?
Yeah, Main Street Community is a San Juan Development Association kind of project. And then we have our historic overlay district, which is for historic preservation. And then we are working towards becoming a certified local government, which is kind of that next steps to historic preservation that I think includes a lot of the things that are probably in your mind right now. And so a big part of this code update is getting our standards and our guidelines updated so that we can become a certified local government and that we can implement these kind of historic preservation principles effectively. So a work in progress.
Are we ready to move down the list, maybe?
Yep. This maximum ground level footprint, we did clarify in the last draft that is related to a tenant space, because we understand that many of the actual, structures, the buildings are larger than 5,000 square feet. But if you wanted to keep that, then we said it's the tenant space is limited to 5,000, not like the actual structure itself. But I don't know if you all are interested in keeping that sort of restriction.
Can you clarify that difference?
Yep. So if you had a building with shared walls between each, space where they, especially from the outside, they look different from one another, they're segmented. That's still fundamentally one building, since it shares a wall. So this was confusing because it said ground level footprint of any building should be 5,000 square feet versus, we think the intent of that was more so related to, each of those storefronts, each of those segments of a building, should be limited to 5,000 square feet in footprint so that there's not one use taking up, a decent portion of a block.
I think we've got another comment from Shane.
Yeah, I was gonna say that when we were first talking about this, we were just talking about the building footprint, not limiting tenant space. So for example, the Wyman's 10,000 square feet Bay Paul that we just approved is gonna be like 7,000 and change. The Grand is like 23,000 square feet. The Benson's way over as well. And there's a bunch of other properties that are way over 5,000 square feet for a single tenant. And so I think.
Are you talking about?
This is the ground level.
Oh,
Correct.
I think
Footprint, yeah, right.
Yeah, that's what we're talking.
Okay, so
Yeah, footprint, I say remove it. Because what if somebody, for example, in the vacant lot across from Harmony Park, wanted to build another beautiful historic looking building, but they were limited. And I hear you, Gabby, that the intent was for the tenant space, but the way this reads says footprint of any building shall not be limited to 5,000 square feet, in my opinion.
Do you think there needs to be a limitation on individual ground level
Tenant spaces.
tenant spaces?
I don't.
We're talking just about BP, is that correct?
The historic overlay district
Historic
is,
Yep.
Okay.
essentially pretty much BP, and then we'll get into the architectural review overlay.
Well, as long as it's mixed use, if it's on Green Street, that should be fine. As far as their tenant space. But I don't think you should put right down next to the Grand Imperial a home. It has to be mixed use. So, yeah, that's another one that needs clarification.
Or
Reworded.
just removed, because, the building code itself will limit the square footage, because I know there is some of that in the land use code rewrite as far as how big a parcel can be, for example. And so I think the code sort of covers our concern of like a building taking up a city block in the historic zone. So I think it's okay to just remove this one altogether.
What about height? Keep that.
I don't think so, because I think we're talking about going to 45 feet.
Oh, God.
And we already have the Grand Imperial as an example of a building that is that exceeds 40 feet. So I think we're already going to go to 45. So that means that the building code again will have its own restrictions. So that if anywhere is going to have the tallest buildings, it would be in the historic overlay, which is the downtown district. So I say let the building code take care of that. Doesn't need to be in the historic guidelines.
And that would be the planning commission?
That would review it for height. No, that would likely be just reviewed by the planning department or the building department.
It's a recommendation in the land use code itself for the BP districts to be 45 feet as maximum height. And so since the overlay is within BP, that's what it would be subject to if we remove this.
I think they should align. I mean, there shouldn't be misalignment between.
Good point.
You mean if they have 45 and we have 40?
Right.
Should align, but I personally think it should go down to 30. Just because the Grand Imperial is 45 or whatever, doesn't mean all our buildings have to be that tall.
Yeah, it's like, where does it stop? Where does it stop?
But would you all be in favor of potentially just removing the height restriction from the historic overlay standards, and then the BP would govern the buildings within the historic overlay, that underlying zoning?
Yeah, I think it's important that they do align. And so I think, yeah, that discussion is for the overall building height, not just the historic.
That's where that word compatibility comes in, which is very confusing. So just like Maria said, just because one building is a certain height, does that mean all the rest should be or could be that height? I don't know if that makes any sense at all. So it just, again, I'm back to the diversity, small, big, wide, narrow, whatever, and so forth.
I think we're just really changing the character of our town, what this town looks like. It
Yeah,
has looked like for the last 100 years, and we're here for a short time, but these buildings are here for hundreds of years.
and we hope for more hundreds of years.
I disagree.
I do think the diversity piece is covered in the line that we skipped there, that buildings shall vary in terms of footprint and elevation, architectural elevation. You know, I think that captures the idea that we want a diverse streetscape. Comment.
I think we have a diverse streetscape.
Yeah, have it, like to keep it.
Shane has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The day after I got elected as mayor, one of the former mayors of Aspen, Steve Scabbins, called me and said his biggest regret was increasing the building height in their town, and that even though it was only a slight increase, he felt that shift drastically changed their village feel. And I'm strongly opposed to increasing it to 45 feet. And if you guys can stubbornly keep it at 40 feet in this instance, I think that could have impact on that conversation around 40 versus 45. And then it's not just 45, it's 45 plus roof deck.
Right.
To 10 feet for solar and other things like that. And I think the landscape of town with the things that are taller being the Grand, the Wyman by a couple feet, this building and the county courthouse, like that makes these historic structures stand out. And if we allow other new structures to be as tall as those, then I think we lose a lot.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing that. And I agree with that. Stay.
40 feet is plenty to get 3 stories in if you want.
There you go.
Which is, I think the conversation is like, in order to have like thicker floors, they're asking for the extra 5 feet to have 3-story buildings, but I think you can still make it work, or just have really tall ceilings in a 2-story building.
Okay. Well, personally, I would like to see 40 feet reduced to 30. I know that will probably never happen, but that's my personal opinion. That's what I'd like to see. And I don't want to see at all, ever 45.
I still do think that, you know, I totally agree. I think that really tall buildings, even just by a little bit, can totally change the character. But I do think that like we should seek alignment between these different standards. And I think that may be a bigger topic that, you know, doesn't fall within this right here. Like, but if we want 40 feet, then I think it should say 40 feet across the board.
Yeah, and this is something that we can, you know, we're bringing the full draft of the land use code, which will include these standards and the dimensional standards for all the districts, including the BP. And, you know, we can ask that question specifically about 40 versus 45 and get, you know, public input on it too, and see where it goes. And then sort of revisit this based on that. But I do think it makes sense to just follow the maximum height of BP. But, you know, it's the land use code is still, you know, being drafted. So 45 is not a set number. That can come down, especially if we hear even more input about it. So we'll flag that as the BP 45 feet question. We will flag that for extra like input. Moving down the line here. We're still okay with single stories not being able to be mixed use, especially if we're not even keeping the mixed use distinction up there. Correct. Okay. So for residential structures, one of the recommendations we do have also related to the BP district is that single family detached is not an allowed use anymore. So this is also a little confusing amidst any mixed use requirements you have. I guess the way to ask this question is, you know, would you be okay with a completely residential building? So a duplex or a multi-unit?
I'm in favor of multi-unit. We obviously need as much residential as we can get. In Silverton, density seems to be like the overall theme that came out of the compass plan, the master plan. So I definitely think that like a strictly residential building on Green Street is okay. But I don't know that a detached single family is. I would say no to that.
That is in the land use code rewrite, correct?
The code rewrite, in the original one that came out, I believe, removed detached single family.
Correct. But so the question that we always kind of run into, especially on, main streets is, okay, if you want to do a multi-unit building, should we at least have the ground floor be, the leasing office or something that, still keeps the general development pattern of having active use and in and out sort of activity, or and also if it is your main space that you want commercial and we're opening up opportunity for residential elsewhere in the town, should this be where you do say no, you can't do an entirely residential, you can do multi-unit, but the ground floor needs to be a coffee shop. That's the balance we're trying to find.
So I like the requirement of having, which now we're reintroducing the mixed use requirement, but
right.
I like the requirement that a residential unit have some kind of like pedestrian connection, commercial use that, on the main street there. So I'm okay with that. I guess what I'm not okay with is the detached single family unit. So.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one?
I believe it should be mixed use.
Okay. Okay. And then this is kind of repetitive of if we're taking this out related to residential structures, then these can also go. These are directly tied to this one. So the next is facade treatments. This is the 25-foot articulation requirements.
I agree with that.
Somebody explain that to me.
It's number C on here.
So Mike, every 25 feet, if the building is, for example, say it's 2 city lots wide, it's 50 feet wide. You can't have a continuous facade across the 50 feet. You'd have to make it appear as 2 25-foot wide buildings.
Gotcha.
I'm opposed to it. It's faux, right? It's faux, and there's lots of examples again of our historic downtown buildings that are wider than 25 feet. So I would at least a minimum, I'm against it, I would delete it. But I would at least, if we want to keep that, I would say increase that number to 50 feet at least.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I support the intention of that. I think that 25 feet seems really small.
And there's plenty of
One
buildings,
building
so
One building lot.
Right.
there's plenty of buildings that are 2 lots wide and they make no pretense of looking like 2 25-foot wide spots. We already have that.
Okay, so we'll increase that to 50. And then you have this, well, it's interesting because this is technically a should statement instead of a shall. And again, pretty open-ended. And I think my question for you all is, you know, when you're looking at applications, you know, are you kind of going one by one by one by one, sort of checking this, or you know, how do you read this criteria and apply it?
I definitely think it should be a should, not a shall, because some of these are so particular. And this makes me want to, I have it queued up. I don't know. I wasn't planning on interrupting this agenda item with it, but this brings to mind the conversation we had at the last historic review meeting, where the architect, can't remember his name right now, but they were looking for the house down at the entrance of Green Street. And he had a real great comment about, you know, mimicking new construction, mimicking Victorian construction, and how it actually devalues the historic Victorian or whatever it may be, because now you're looking at them and you're questioning, was this built in 2020 as a replica of a historic building, or am I looking at a historic building? So I'm okay that these stay, but I do think I like the should and not the shall, just to give us a little flexibility there. If it is a new build that we don't necessarily want to mimic a Victorian building or whatever it may be described as, but and I do, again, I'd like us to watch that like 2-3 minutes or whatever it is. And I was planning on doing that later when we had an opportunity for that. But that's my thought on this about the elements of the building. Any other comments from the committee?
I think this one makes sense as a should, and it's a useful list. I think we keep it.
I like to change to should also. But then each application would be looked at as an individual application.
Shouldn't that be true anyway?
Hopefully.
Well, and maybe it's a matter of kind of changing this intro to saying elements that may be reviewed or that may establish consistency with the district and adjacent buildings.
Yeah. Sounds good. Consistent.
Okay. Okay, so then we've got entries, windows, awnings and canopies, and screening. So entries is that it's incorporate glass doors and large vertically oriented storefront windows, and that entry doors shall be recessed.
Again, I would prefer that this was a should, not a shall. Because I do think that they should incorporate these things, but also if it were a completely new build, again, are we wanting to mimic or respect the old? So I would just say that I would prefer it would be a should.
Does that include the recessed piece, or should that still be a shall?
Oh, no, that would include the recessed.
Okay.
And I also think that should apply for the windows personally. Again, going back to the architect's little spiel about, you know, you don't want to make something that looks like it was built 150 years ago, because you're actually taking away from the thing next door that was built 150 years ago. So I agree with that. These things are good things, the vertical windows and the recessed doors, but I think there should be a little bit of flexibility there in case it is something that is a brand new build and we're not trying to mimic.
But the problem with not having a recessed door on Green Street, Main Street, is if someone walks out of that building and they run into the people walking down the street. You need to have a little bit of leeway so the people living in the building can see someone's coming and they don't just run into them. So I think that makes complete sense to have recessed buildings on Green Street.
But are you okay with that? It should be recessed just to give us a little flexibility?
Well, I think we have to be careful with the word shall and should, because we get into some semantics here, and I don't see anything wrong with the word shall on this one.
Well, that just really, I mean, that affects that's huge for the architecture of the building.
To have a recessed door?
Yeah, that changes a lot for the overall design of the building.
Okay, but that's the way a lot of the doors are in Silverton, most of them. And,
Oh, I
and I don't
agree.
think we should lose that. I don't think we should lose that.
Okay, well, we
That's
disagree
my
on that.
opinion.
I would like to see some flexibility there. Personally, I do agree that entry doors should be encouraged, recessed entry doors. But I don't know that they shall be required, is my point, to give flexibility to a new build.
I think they shall be required is my point.
Right, and we disagree on that. So if anybody else has any opinion there, please speak up.
Somebody's got an opinion.
I have a comment, and I don't know if it's anywhere in your guidelines. You probably have purview over which way the door opens or closes also. If I'm not mistaken, historically, doors open inside because of the snow. It was hard to open doors outward. So I don't know if this is in there anywhere, but that may be some common ground also, where if doors open inward, then you're not
That also
hitting
depends on
someone on
whether,
Green Street, but.
that also depends on whether the entranceway is inset. If the entryway is recessed, then you have a little more flexibility as to the door coming out or in. So because then it won't affect traffic on the sidewalk. So there's variables there, obviously.
Okay. Well, there's variables in everything, and I guess we have to just consider that every applicant is individual and is unique, and we have to look at that and consider their uniqueness.
Right, and I think,
But they have guidelines. We all have guidelines.
right, and I think that changing something like this to should, it doesn't at all remove that important consideration. It just means that if somebody comes with a compelling application that does not meet that, we have a little more flexibility to.
But then they also have flexibility to say, you just said shall, not should.
Right.
So we have to be really careful with the way we word things.
I agree with Melissa. I think this should be a should.
Well,
Right,
we can change it to should. And then, as we've got some more to get through here, and there's likely going to be, it's a should because you have guidelines for that style of historic architecture. And, you're already reviewing these things case by case for a reason. So you will have other, discussion points to make with someone that even if they say, well, you didn't tell me I have to, if it's in keeping with that historic architectural type, et cetera, you'll have other things to point to, I guess is what I'm trying to say, even if it's a should. And so I guess I'm wondering if the same thing applies for windows.
I think so. I mean, I agree that they should be vertically oriented. I agree with that statement, but I would rather it be a should than a shall, just in case. Again, we're not trying to like make a replica of historic architecture.
An applicant can always make the case why they don't want to respect the shall also.
A shall is a shall, I believe. A shall is the law.
It's just a little harder to get around, especially once we adopt more standards. That's gonna give this.
That's why I think we should keep it, because people have a tendency to try to get around things.
Right.
Some people are smarter than the average bear. They know how to manipulate words. They know how to manipulate committees.
So then, maybe this is more so keep them shall, but we need to write in the code, the ability to request some adjustments from that. Based on a set of criteria about it still being consistency, but allowing for creativity, all these things you're saying. So we could keep them, it's kind of, you can do either direction. So we can keep it shall, and then they make the case that, they want to be more creative and they have the ability to do so. We can do that. We can make that part of it.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that's where the case by case basis comes in.
Which is better than just a hard stop.
Yeah.
Right.
Shall. So yeah, that might be a good way to go.
Okay, so we will keep those, but we will add the ability to request like adjustments to it. Okay. The next one is just saying awnings or canopies over the public right of way are permitted.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone have an issue with that? Does anything need to be added to that or no? You had any issues with awnings and canopies?
No.
Okay. Screening of mechanical elevator satellites screened from street front view.
Keep it. I say.
The awnings and canopies, is that both front and rear? Yes.
No, you wouldn't be able to put a canopy over, well, it reads public right of way. My first thought is that you would not be able to put a canopy over an alley. And that would come down more to a public works decision. So.
Nothing's allowed to go beyond this setback. Like I have a building I'm developing, we have a 5-foot rear setback. It's my understanding nothing can protrude into that setback, even if it doesn't go over the right of way. Is that incorrect?
No, that's correct. The awnings and the canopies are more, the intent of that code was going over, sidewalks on Blair Street.
So if I have a door out the back of my building, and my building is to the rear setback of 5 feet, can I put an audio of it?
That's a conversation we should probably have with the building inspector.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if there was clarification in the code about that.
Mhm.
So that's really where my question stems from.
Yeah, I think what you're getting into is more of a setback question, and this is more of awnings and canopies are allowed over like a sidewalk. Mhm. But we can talk about that at a later time for sure.
Yeah, and right now in the land use code, there are suggested permitted setback encroachments, but it's only front and street side. So it doesn't address that rear issue, so. Again, for a later time. So we're good with screening,
Mhm.
okay, and then blank walls. And I think we have heard that this publicly viewable is challenging to interpret sometimes.
And
Maybe.
also, the way this reads now, I mean, somebody like the application in front of us this evening, windowless walls are appropriate and when there's no setbacks in your building in the BP because somebody's going to build next to you and a window is a problem. So that one's tough. I think you should have windowless walls if you know that someday there could be a party wall built next to you, or a shared wall or an adjacent neighboring wall. I just don't think this works for the lot line to lot line development on Green Street. And you could argue those aren't publicly viewable today, but they won't necessarily be in the future. Because absolutely, if it's a corner or it's Green Street, then no way should we have windowless walls. But if you're, Ben, sitting in the audience there, that is building a building that someday is going to have lot line to lot line buildings next to him, then a window doesn't make sense. So I don't know how we deal with that, because they should be prohibited facing Green or any corner street.
Well, I mean, we could add that as the regulation. We could say blank windowless walls are prohibited adjacent to Green Street or
With street front.
Or I guess it would be abutting Green Street. Or to your point, should it just be frontage on Green Street? Like
Well, no, because if it were a corner building, so if it were
Oh.
any street front,
Okay,
it would, no windowless walls. But if it's an interior lot, so I think any street frontage should not allow windowless walls. Any walls that are facing street.
yeah, that makes sense.
But at the same time, we don't know that a building, for instance, like Ben's, you don't know that their neighbor is going to build a 30-foot tall building. It might be 25-foot tall. So we can't assume things like that.
But are you comfortable with that they're prohibited on any street frontage?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Lucy, I just want to check, is there do we have a typical time we usually stop this meeting? I want to make sure that I'm, not taking all of your time.
I would defer to what the committee is thinking. I would say like typically 7. But if the committee is comfortable going past that, I would defer to you all.
I think we can get a lot decided in the next 35 minutes or so.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And so the next checklist are all of the different builder's handbook guidelines. And I will say there are some, you know, repeats or very similar language between things like the Green Street versus Blair Street. And, you know, an overarching question we have is ultimately it would be great to not distinguish between the two, but we know that Blair Street does have historical characteristics that are different than Green Street. So,
Yes, thank you.
yep. And just something for you all to know that, you know, we've been talking a lot with staff about this, and especially in conjunction with that CLG certification, you know, the concept of maybe for now we don't use the builder's handbook, but we defer to the Secretary of the Interior standards, which are very common and very well known across historic preservation work and building. And then if the town wants to create something a bit more, you know, personalized, I guess, for the town, for guidelines, then move into that. But I would be curious to know which, if any, of these types of guidelines have served you well, or if most of them are just pretty vague, or yeah, just want to get your thoughts on if there's any content of the builder's handbook that you feel works well for design guideline purposes.
I really support the idea of using the state historic guidelines.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Well, and I mean, that's, again, that's a common thing and would keep you in line with all of the requirements. It would just be a matter of making sure, you know, when and if, you know, this gets through adoption and it moves that way and it shifts to that you all are comfortable using that new document, those new documents to do your reviews. But it sounds like for now we can suggest that, and we can, when we post this for the public, we can include a link to those Secretary of the Interior standards so that anyone who's interested in seeing what that entails can go look at that. And I will say those do allow for you to do that interpretation of, you know, Blair Street, the balconies, you know, the boardwalks, that sort of thing. Like that would be captured within those standards. So you wouldn't need to worry about losing that. Does that sound okay with everybody? I won't make us go through these checklists if that's the case.
I think that sounds great.
Okay. So then the last checklist we do have is for the architectural review overlay district. And a bit of, again, we've been talking a lot with staff about the AROD and its functionality and the intent. And, you know, our question for you all is really related to, you know, it's this, like we talked last time, it's kind of this historic light district. It's not the full historic district, but it's clearly, you know, Green Street is important and is the entrance to the town. But so with using this checklist, I'm curious what comes out of your A-Rod reviews that you think is, you know, most meaningful. So it would be, it's pretty open-ended here, of what you review for. And so the direction that will be moving in this next public draft is having standards for Green Street, like a budding Green Street, before the historic district and outside of the historic district, but not overlapping. We want to remove that overlap. And have those try and get at keeping things generally historic, but not the full-blown historic review. We did a lot of research about other similar communities where the entirety of the town is a historic, is designated historic. So things like Georgetown, Colorado, Cripple Creek, Ouray, no, maybe not Ouray, and Telluride. And they actually all kind of have a tiered system of looking at their core historic district like you all have, and then having some general design standards throughout the town. But for our purposes, we're trying to figure out what you want to look at for those Green Street properties that are currently in A-Rod. And what is important to regulate on those properties.
Well, I'll comment that I don't think that the historic regulations should apply to the areas of Green Street outside of the historic zone. Because
Okay.
again, then we're having everybody mimic the architecture, rather than sort of complement it. But I do think there should be regulations. So I am still in favor of no blanket regulations. Well, with few blanket regulations. The one I'm going to get on a soapbox about is the reflective materials. I think we need to be careful with that throughout the entire town. But otherwise, I think that, yeah, the historic downtown is tiered differently than the remainder of Green Street. So maybe this is more work, but I think we need to have two different zones there, as you refer to them as tiers. I think that we need that. For example, you shouldn't have to have like recessed openings on a building down by the visitor center, right? That's outside of our pedestrian zone. So as an example of how the regulations may differ.
Mm-hmm. So when you all look at an application that's only in the A-Rod and not in the historic district, what do you typically look at?
I think the problem has been is that the A-Rod refers to the builder's handbook.
Right.
And that's been our that's been the catch there, because that does sort of make the regulations the entire street length. So that's where I think the problem has lied, is in that reference to the builder's handbook, which is very much the recessed openings, the 25-foot facades, etc. So I just think that I like the idea of doing away with the builder's handbook, use the state regulations for our historic downtown, and have some looser regulations for the remainder of Green Street. Because what we don't want is, for example, a glass building, right? I mean, we're trying to keep, or even like a metal Butler building or something like that. That's what I think the intent of the A-Rod should be.
So Melissa, you're thinking mostly like materials.
Not necessarily just materials, because orientation of windows and recessed openings and 25-foot facades. So
In terms of the A-Rod though.
in terms of the A-Rod, okay, so in terms of the A-Rod, yeah, I guess building materials, yeah, that probably is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I agree with what you guys are bringing up. I don't have a problem with that.
Is there anything else beyond building materials on Green Street that,
Well, I personally would think that a really low angled gabled roof would look awful. So I don't know. I think roof lines might be something to consider. You know, say you had a single story, really low angled gabled roof. I think that would be out of place. So it may be roof lines too.
I agree with that also.
There's definitely good stuff in the builder's handbook. And I'm not stating an opinion or position. It was useful for me. I got references like the form of how the buildings historically were on Green Street versus Blair and those kinds of details. And so what I'm hearing, just my own perception, is that we're really trying to come up with a vision and identity for Green Street and, you know, what is the passageway into the historic district. And well, this is the right committee to come up with that. So just a comment, I'm not really giving any direction or opinion necessarily, just that I found that vision document to be quite useful for me personally. But I'm not necessarily in favor of keeping it, just some direction from the committee to the building community about what should happen rather than just what's not permitted could actually be useful.
Yeah.
I believe.
Thank you.
I think we need to be more, all our handbooks, guidelines, everything needs to be more compatible, but I think we're working on that. So that'll be a problem that's going to disappear, hopefully.
and I think you know, another question, right now, the A-Rod district boundaries really bulb out at the end of town there. And, you know, what we're hearing more so is the actual Green Street abutting, like really the tourism corridor is right there. Cause you know, once you get into the actual historic district, you're probably, you know, you do extend back into Blair Street. But for the purpose of figuring out if there are specific design standards we need for just, you know, right up against Green Street, you know, our thought has been to remove the A-Rod as an overlay district and potentially just have design standards for properties either abutting Green Street or within a certain distance. You know, we can do it a different way, but kind of taking away that actual overlay as it is mapped now. But would that be problematic for you all if those areas on the, right at the entrance of town where it kind of extends further. Would it be problematic for you all to not get this, extra level of design?
And so I think I can probably help clarify a little to the committee that I think Gabby's referring to essentially the Y, because that is part of the A-Rod today. So along Highway 550, inside of the horseshoe, this side of it, and down toward Memorial Park as well. So my opinion is that I agree that the corridor, the tourist corridor, is what we really need to protect. And I'm okay with letting the Y go, because you're already going to have building codes that are going to have some kind of, standards and protections there. And I guess Memorial Park as well. But I also don't feel like if you're building something on the hill above Memorial Park that it needs to look historic. So I'm okay with just having it be Green Street, personally. Anybody else having a thought on that?
I agree. I think Green Street is appropriate.
Well, I know that, where are you talking about? Starting at the grocery store or starting at those homes? Melissa?
Anything, so basically, it starts down there on 5th Street, right? So basically when you come off the highway, you're no longer on 550 and you're on Green Street. So the second you're on Green Street, then I think that A-Rod should apply.
I agree.
Well, and keep in mind, we're having these conversations. And so what that means is we're going to draft something. And that something might not be exactly what we're all envisioning here, right? Because that's, we're just talking. But it is something for you all to react to and to think about, and then maybe think about a different way, and then we can adjust it again, especially since this is a new approach. I just want you all to know that this isn't what you see in the next draft is not set in stone. It's just going to be an interpretation of these conversations, hoping to, move us forward in the process. But I think, what you will see in the full draft of the land use code is an updated historic overlay district that reflects our keep, delete, modify that we did at the beginning. And then a new approach to design standards, where there's going to be this corridor, Green Street specific, outside of the historic overlay. The minute you get in the historic overlay, those standards kick in. And then, so that is what you will see in the draft. Any other thoughts? Otherwise, I will let you all continue on your meeting.
Any comments from the committee?
I don't think so.
Hearing none.
All right.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Gabby. Thank you.
Thanks.
Gabby.
Okay, so next on the agenda here is reports. So do any members of the committee have any related reports, announcements, updates, or communication they'd like to share at this time?
And Melissa, we amended the agenda to put an item right after this one in committee business to discuss the vacancy.
Oh, okay. So can you give us a little outline of that?
Yes, yeah. So as you all know, David Pollitt has resigned from the Historic Review Committee. So we have a vacancy. And general procedure would be to move to our alternate. But Mike has informed me that he would like to stay an alternate, which I absolutely respect and understand. So thank you for that. So we are going to solicit a spot to get a new member. So that will go to the Board of Trustees on June 24th. And then after that's reviewed, that will go out to the public June 25th. But start telling your friends. And then we will request to have those applications back in by July 5th to review them at the July 8th Board of Trustees meeting in hopes to have a full committee by our July 9th meeting. Any questions? Or concerns or comments on that plan or anything related to that?
No,
Okay,
that sounds good. Thank you, Lucy.
yeah, thank you.
Okay. So, jumping back into communications, does any of the committee members have any communication they'd like to share at this time?
No.
Okay. I actually, if you guys can hang for just, I think it's only going to be like 2 minutes. I am hoping to just review the comments that we received on the last Historic Review Committee meeting from the architect. So real quick, I think for 2 minutes, will you watch this? I'll share my screen because I think it's really useful. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Let's see. Oh. It's asking that I change some settings in my Zoom. I don't know if we'll see if I can do this very fast, maybe. Until it's quit. Oh, okay. Scratch that, you guys. It's making me like quit Zoom and I'd have to leave the meeting to change that. So maybe I'll try that again at our next meeting. And anybody else with any comment or report? Seeing none, we can move on to approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. And I do know that, Lucy, we need to just correct the typo, but I think that, let's see, I am supposed to remind you that minutes are not a line by line recounting of everything said in a meeting, but instead a record of substantive decisions in any direction given by the committee to staff. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes? Would somebody like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second. Can we have a roll call?
Mike Garriott,
Yes.
Maria Samora,
Yes.
Carl Schnickner,
Yes.
Vice Chair Melissa Childs.
Yes. The motion passes unanimously. Okay, now we are moving on to the public comment. If anyone from the public wishes to make a comment, now is the time to do so. Please state your name prior to your comment and you will have up to 3 minutes to speak. We will start with any in-person comments and then move to comments on Zoom. Please note that the YouTube version of the meeting does not support interaction and commentary. If you are online wishing to comment, please join the Zoom link and raise your hand.
Does not appear that we have any in-person or online public comment at this time.
Okay. Hearing none, I would say that the committee business is concluded, and could we please have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
I second.
Roll call, please.
Mike Garrett,
Yes.
Maria Samora,
Yes.
Carl Schnickner,
Yes.
Vice Chair Melissa Childs.
Yes. Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Everyone. You all. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.